Hello and welcome to another edition of another book review. This week I'll be reviewing Quentin Tarantino's nonfiction work, Cinema Speculation. I'll talk briefly about the author, go into an overview of what the book is, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off. We'll finish off there. I'm not quite sure what I'll be reading for next time. Quentin Tarantino is a very famous film director, has written and directed, I think at this point, directed 9 of his own movies, written all 9 of those movies, has written some other movies for other folks, was a screenwriter and a little bit of a script doctor for a while before breaking out in the early 90s with first Reservoir Dogs and then Pulp Fiction. This is his first work of nonfiction. He also wrote a novelization of one of his movies, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Um, and what this is Quentin Tarantino's look at several films of the 1970s. He has a series of essays about each one of these films, and from these films, he talks about people involved in those films as far as the careers of could be Steve McQueen, it could be a gentleman named Don Siegel, could be Sylvester Stallone. So he goes in a few different places in the book. It's all very, very tightly related to cinema in one form or another, and it's really more of a celebration of Quentin Tarantino's loves of the 70s than really anything else. If you really want to see how Tarantino um, approaches film, what he interests him about film, what he likes about movies, this is, I think, a really fascinating look at that world. It's really written in his voice. His voice comes very clearly through the essays. There's not really a separation between the person writing this, the person writing his movies, in terms of what the book is. Um, and you have basically most chapters are a dissection of a movie. Could be everything from, like I said, the director, how this movie relates to his every director he covers in the book is a male. Everything he talks about, really, most of the movies he looks at are um, mostly relatively obscure movies from the 70s. Taxi Driver is by far, I think, the most well known of these movies that he does an essay on. Movies like Rolling Thunder and Bullet, I had heard of, but I'd never have seen. There's a movie called Funhouse, which I also have never seen, that he talks about. He does go away from that format for a little bit and talks about a couple places he breaks the strict format. He also mentioned Sisters, the Brian De Palma fan. Brian De Palma's huge, huge influence on Quentin Tarantino, and you kind of see that through this essay that he does about Sisters. I think he does a very good job of being honest throughout the book and really get his unvarnished feelings about certain things. He's not afraid to call people out and says, I think this could have been done better. Paul Schrader is a screenwriter. He's a screenwriter and director, but mostly known as for his screenwriting Taxi Driver, and he talks about the proclivity Paul Schrader has towards a little bit of um, Deus Ex Machina, maybe a little bit too strong, but there's a lot. There's not always a there are plot machinations that Paul Schrader leans upon in his films that I think irk Quentin Tarantino. He talks about that in a couple of the essays. A couple of the essays break apart away from the format where he takes a movie and writes a whole chapter on the movie. There's also a chapter on what would happen if Brian De Palma had directed Taxi Driver instead of Martin Scorsese. There is a look at the the new class of directors who are coming into their own in the 70s, like Coppola and Scorsese and George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. He looks at them and he compares them to more avant garde directors who are more outside of the system and had maybe higher literary aspirations for what film could be. They were truly more radical, and he compares this class to the new calls it, I guess, the auteurs versus the new brats. That was a pretty interesting chapter. You get really a sense of how much he really cares very deeply about this group, how much he respects really the 70s filmmakers, especially that group of people who were coming up in that kind of cohort or class. The people who were written about in Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, that famous book, which is still on my to read list all these years later, still have not gotten around to it. But that that group of people, he really has a lot of deep admiration for De Palma on that list, obviously. And so that comes through in that chapter. That's one of, I think, the highlights of the book. Um, I think if there's anything I would knock it for, some of the essays are going to be more enjoyable to you than others, depending on your um, proclivity or your knowledge of that particular director or actors in that section. Um, Most of it is pretty. I enjoyed it while I was reading it. I don't remember very much about it. It kind of comes and goes pretty through. I think if you're someone who's a deep has a deep love of 70s cinema, which I honestly I don't. I'm much more of an 80s and 90s person as far as movies I watch to this day. I don't. There's still huge holes in my knowledge of 70s cinema. Maybe this will spur me to go on and fill some of those gaps. But if you're someone who has that love of this era, there's a lot here that I think you'll enjoy in kind of tying in different actors and their careers to this book. I thought was really interesting. I was surprised at how much admiration Tarantino has for Sylvester Stallone, and he has a long chapter on one of his movies, Paradise Alley, which I've never seen and not heard of before this book. Um, some of it is maybe more interesting than other stuff. I think the chapter on what would happen if Brian De Palma had directed Taxi Driver instead of Scorsese, which I was like, I saw the chapter title and I was really amped up for that chapter, and it just kind of was very ho hum to me. It wasn't particular spectacular. He has a long chapter at the end of the book where he talks about his debt to a gentleman who lived with him during this time named Floyd, and how Floyd influenced him as not only a lover of movies, but also someone who was writing, inspired him to be a screenwriter. Um, I guess the only other knock is, like I said, some chapters are stronger than others. It kept my attention more than others. Most of it kind of went in. While I enjoyed reading it, I don't remember. I don't think I'll take very much from the book, other than Quentin Tarantino's admiration for some people and how he viewed some. I think if anything, this will. If I was going to recommend the book to anybody, it'd be someone who loves 70s cinema but also had areas where maybe needed a nudge to watch certain movies, if it's Dirty Harry or Escape from Alcatraz or whatever. I think this book may inspire people to watch those older movies, and for that, I think it's really good. Quentin Tarantino, first and foremost, loves movies, and if you read this, that's the one thing you take away from it, maybe more than anything else. Before he was a director, before he was a screenwriter, he's someone who loved movies, and even as a little kid, the love for these things comes very clearly through. And even things that I think for most people at the time would have been seen as schlocky or lowbrow, he didn't really separate them as far as his taste from other stuff. And so if you want to know who Quentin Tarantino is as a director and what his inspiration is for things and his viewpoint of the world, I think this is a really great place to start if that's something that interests you. So that's who I would recommend it to. I wouldn't recommend it for anybody who just didn't like movies. I don't know what you're going to do with this book, and I guess someone who is bored with essays. I don't know, I don't know if I've reviewed anything else quite that was like an essay collection. This is a pure essay collection. Each chapter is uh, about a movie in the 1970s, or it's about a uh, group of people. He does talk about the film critics of the Los Angeles Times during this time, which was also an interesting chapter. Um, but it kind of goes everywhere, and so it kind of covers what LA was like in that time, what it was like for Quentin Tarantino to be a young white kid going to all black movie theaters, what it was like to um, his opinions of these kind of new upcoming class of auteurs. It's all that. So there's some stuff in here. If any of that sounds interesting, you'll like. It's very much told in his point of view. Um, if you're not into the whole Quentin Tarantino thing, you don't care about him, you don't like any of his movies, I don't know if this book is going to do anything for you, to be honest with you. I think it is shot completely through his sensibilities and it's completely done in his voice. And so if those things aren't interested to you, it are not interesting to you, you won't be interested. You won't dig this. So I would skip it. Um, but if you're someone who likes film and likes essays and are interested in what makes Quentin Tarantino tick, then I would definitely recommend picking this up. It's quick enough read to where you'll get through it pretty quickly. It's only about, I think, 10 hours on the audiobook. It's only about 270 pages, the book itself. And if there are essays that you're not interested in completely, you can always skip them. So that's kind of the benefit of the essay collection. So Quentin Tarantino, cinema speculation. Not sure what I'll be reading for next time. I'll go ahead and leave my link below to my Twitter account if you want to see me there, follow me there. If you want to learn, if you want to look at my review for the last book I read, which was Once Upon Sleepless in Hollywood, which is about kind of the fall of the movie industry from maybe the early 2000s to now, and why they're not making more movies that Quentin Tarantino is really enjoying in the 1970s today. I'll leave the link below to that review if you want to check that one out. Until next time.